You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
U.S. Cellular has noticed the way we use our phones has gotten ironic. We try to put our phones down for dinner, but the menu's on a QR code. That's ironic. We hit like on social posts that we don't actually like, which is ironic. Which is why U.S. Cellular created Us Mode, to help us reconnect with each other and use our phones less ironically. A phone company wanting people to use their phones less is ironic. Let's find us again with Us Mode from U.S. Cellular. Visit uscellular.com/built-for-us to get started.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. Well, I want to take a look at the Philadelphia Eagles. We're just a handful of days away from the start of, well, friggin' kickoff, man. So let's back all the way up. Let's take a look at the Eagles. We'll start with 2023, their offseason, and what team they currently have right now. So, we'll get started. 2023 Philadelphia Eagles went 11-6 with Nick Sirianni at the helm. They started off, as we've talked about several times now, they started off 10-1. Real absolute powerhouse. Their only loss came to the Jets in somewhat of a fluky game. You know how that's how that goes. Even when you're a hot team, you just kind of drop one random one in there. And although it's true they did beat a lot of bad teams, they also beat some pretty good teams. The Rams, maybe not the most elite team in the world, but it's certainly a playoff team that they beat. They beat the Dolphins 31-17. They beat Dallas 28-23. Actually, 3 in a row. It was Dallas 28-23, Chiefs 21-17, and Bills 37-34. At this point, you're looking at some of the best teams in football getting taken out by the Eagles, who are now 10-1. You're thinking this is the best team in football. I mean, it's not even close. Then they play the 49ers, another tough one, and they fall 42-19. So that's kind of a shocking one, but you think, okay, well, stumble, they'll be okay. They go up against Dallas again. This time, instead of beating Dallas 28-23, they lose to Dallas 33-13. And they go up against the Seahawks, finally getting a rest from some of the super premier teams, a decent team, but not an elite team. They lose again, 3 in a row now, 20-17. Then they face the Giants, a bottom 5 team in the NFL. They finally get a win, 33-25. They go up against the Cardinals. You think maybe they got their groove back. They lose 35-31. Then the Giants again, one of the worst teams in football. Okay, well, this should be a win. They lose 27-10 to the freaking Giants. Then they go into the postseason, week 19. And yes, injuries are a part of this and whatnot, just as it is for every team. But still, even if you want to make excuses for the offense only scoring 9, the defense allowed 32. They lost 32-9 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Overall, in terms of points scored, they scored 7th most points, but their defense ranked 30th in points allowed. They were 8th in yards, but 26th in yards allowed. So, very, very big difference. And again, lots of talk about the defense and just how terrible it was. And so, again, not to just continue back into my talking points here, but there's reason for skepticism. And the fact that it's like, well, they drafted 2 corners. Granted, one of them is not going to play, but they drafted this other guy, and, he'll play. Okay, yeah, maybe that'll fix everything. I don't know. Anyways, kicking it over to the offseason now. A lot of coaching overhauls here. So the offensive coordinator last year was Brian Johnson. He got replaced by Kellen Moore. Quarterback coach was Alex Tanney, is now Doug Nussmeier. Assistant offensive line coach has changed. The defensive coordinator, they had Sean Desai and Matt Patricia. Neither of them are there. It's now Vic Fangio. The senior defensive assistant, I guess, was Matt Patricia. Now it's Clint Hurt. He got replaced. The linebackers coach is new. The defensive backs coach is new. Apparently they didn't have a cornerback or safeties coach. They do now. Assistant linebackers coach is new. Everybody's new, right? Entirely new staff, aside from basically the head coach. If we come down here in free agency, they lost, I would say, less people, or at least less high power people than they gained. Brandon Graham, they re-signed. Albert OK, kind of an OK player, is re-signed. They lost Driscoll, Marcus Mariota, Nick Murrow, Sua Opeta, Rashad Penny, Boston Scott, DeAndre Swift went to the Bears, Quez Watkins to the Steelers. Nobody really that is a super amazing player. In fact, I think the only guy they lost that was worth any real amount of money was DeAndre Swift to the Bears, and that was 3 years, $24 million. And obviously they upgraded that position. Speaking of, here are their signings, and there's a ton of them. And again, this is part of the reason why I'm not going to go through all of them again, but why there is optimism for this team, because they signed a bunch of people. Now, I would like to remind everybody that just because you sign somebody doesn't mean that it's a good signing or that it makes you better. It's just a name, but here we go. Saquon Barkley got signed off the Giants, 3 years, $37.75 million. Linebacker Zach Bond, 1 year, $3.5 million. Kind of tells you the expectations there. Bryce Huff, pass rusher from the Jets, got 3 years, $51 million. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is back after spending time in Detroit, 3 years, $27 million. I've already given you my opinion of that guy. Devontae Parker came over from the Patriots basically for free. Devin White came from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for $4 million. Oren Burks is there from the 49ers, former Packer. Some other names I guess you might recognize: Paris Campbell, Will Greer, Avanti Maddox, CJ Uzoma, Mekhi Becton. Surprisingly, 1 year, $2.75 million. Shocking, the value that is lost on that guy. Holy cow. Otherwise, a bunch of names that are probably not going to be big contributors. Nick Gates, Matt Sharping. There is some question about their offensive line, similar to the Packers, where they look at it and just say there's no depth. I was watching an Eagles guy talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, saying, I don't know if we have a backup center. It's a pretty rough situation there. And then some guys that got released. Safety Kevin Byard, who is now a Chicago Bear. I think that they went backwards there, going from Byard to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They lost Avanti Maddox. No, they didn't. We just said he came back. Shaquille Quarterman and Tuio Pelotu. Retirements: Jason Kelsey, one of the biggest ones. Fletcher Cox, another huge one. And then Devontae Parker, wide receiver, actually retired May 22nd, which is somewhat funny. And then trades. Kenny Pickett is now the backup quarterback, so if anything happens, that's going to be who's coming in. And then Jahan Dotson is another one from the Washington Commanders. I think that's kind of another reason why people are looking at the team going, oh, man, they got that third guy. And we'll look at that, but there's not a lot of reason for optimism. Now, everybody's going to pull the same card, as always happens. Yeah, but it was Washington, and they were terrible, and now he's with a great team and a good quarterback and a good offensive play call. So as though that just automatically makes bad players good players. It can happen. It's possible for a really good player to be suppressed, but it's more likely that a good player would be recognized as being a good player, just like every other good player on a bad team, like Devontae Adams. He didn't just go down to becoming terrible because, well, look at how bad his coach is and the play caller is and the quarterback is. Doesn't matter. PFF and other things will pick up on these things. You're still going to find a way to emerge and demonstrate your talents. Whatever. Then there's the draft, which again, and I mentioned this yesterday, they kind of get a lot of credit for things that are question marks. Quinyon Mitchell was the first pickup. I don't know exactly what their status is as far as who's going to be playing at cornerback and whatnot. But Quinyon Mitchell was picked up. Obviously, they have high hopes for him. Cooper DeJean, I don't believe, is going to be playing. And then, hold on one second here. Where is... I was mistaken. Those are the two, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. Cooper DeJean is not going to be playing in the game, and Quinyon Mitchell is expected to play in the game. We'll see how that pans out. Again, I'm not just going to go ahead and automatically assume he's going to be an elite football player. We have seen a lot of players drafted in the first round, a lot of corners, not just for the Packers and for obviously the Vikings, and there's a lot of teams that draft first round corners that don't pan out, especially week 1 of the season. We'll take a look at his preseason as well when we get to the point of actually going through the roster. But that's one guy. Jalix Hunt is a defensive end. I don't expect to see him a ton. They've got Will Shipley. Again, don't expect to see him with what they have. So you get all the way down here, and what do you really expect to see? Not a ton. So a lot of their hopes hinge on Quinyon Mitchell. Of course, they were hoping it would be DeJean and Mitchell so that they can say all their cornerback woes are fixed. But in reality, remember, this was a terrible defense last year, and they put a lot of the blame on the corners. And now they want to say, well, that's fixed. Based on what? Based on what? I mean, I liked Quinyon. I definitely liked Cooper, and there were a couple other guys that I liked, but who cares? I mean, I don't know, man. I wouldn't be feeling quite as good as some people who want to just steamroll over this. Like, oh yeah, the 30th ranked defense is going to be great now because they got Vic Fangio, who didn't have a great defense last year, who's coming to a worse group of defensive players now, telling them to switch their scheme and then rely on a rookie to fix everything. Yeah, that's certainly a plan, I guess. Anyways, when we come back, I want to go through position by position, kind of take a look at some of these guys. We'll see how in-depth we decide to go, but one of the things that I would like to integrate into the conversation at least a little bit is kind of the overall health of the team, because not only is this maybe not my favorite team in the world today, I think their future is looking quite bleak. I think that this is a team that has been going backwards, and this is a team that is still propped up by a lot of really old guys. There's a lot of patchwork going on here. I think Saquon is patchwork. I think Mekhi Becton is patchwork. And then again, you've got really old guy. This is not a team that, in my opinion, is exactly heading in the right direction. So, anyways, we'll take a break. We'll be right back. U.S. Cellular has noticed the way we use our phones has gotten ironic. We try to put our phones down for dinner, but the menu's on a QR code. That's ironic. We hit like on social posts that we don't actually like, which is ironic. Which is why U.S. Cellular created Us Mode, to help us reconnect with each other and use our phones less ironically. A phone company wanting people to use their phones less is ironic. Let's find us again with Us Mode from U.S. Cellular. Visit uscellular.com/builtforus to get started. Kick off the 2024 football season with Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. It's the easiest way to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. This September, get automatic win every week by picking Caleb Williams to get just 1 passing yard. That's right, 4 weeks of free wins, but only if you jump on it before September ends. And don't forget, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks even has injury insurance, so if your player leaves the game early, you're still in the game. I've been loving Prize Picks, my go-to for simple, fast, and fun fantasy action. When my picks hit, I get paid in as little as 15 minutes. Download Prize Picks now and use code PACKDADDY to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code PACKDADDY for $50 guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Remember, Prize Picks is a skill-based fantasy game, making your lineups just got a whole lot more exciting.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the vehicle owner's manual for important feature limitations and information.
All right, so first things first, we got to start with the quarterback, obviously. Jalen Hurts took a lot of crap last year toward the second half of the season. For whatever reason, people kind of blame him. I shouldn't even say they were blaming him. It's just when the conversation turned to MVP, nobody wanted to talk about Jalen Hurts anymore because the team itself was falling off. He never really fell off, though. I don't know that I would ever really put him in the same category as Jordan Love, which I know maybe sounds crazy and arrogant considering the exact circumstances. But I mean, it's 70, 60, 80, 70, 60, 80, 60, 70, 70, 70, 60, 70, 70, 80, 90, 50. So the last 2 weeks were really weird. He got his one and only 90 and then his one and only 50. This may have been partially due to the injury, although it doesn't really make sense. An injury doesn't make you play bad unless you're injured and continue playing. But he didn't get to finish out the game, so who knows? He could have pulled it back around. But anyways, yeah, I mean, he's a consistently good football player, good to very good. He didn't have. I mean, you remember Jordan maybe had a little bit more lows, during his period when he was playing well. It was certainly more in the beginning of the season. But I mean, if you just took what Jordan did and then look at this, I mean, you'd rather have Jordan Love than this. But he's a really, I'm not going to say game manager because that's disrespectful for what I think he actually is, which is just again, consistently good to very good quarterback. But I think he's the kind of guy that you plug into a team like the Eagles, at least what they have been, that has wide receivers and an offensive line, which might be kind of a past tense thing, and a really solid defense, and he's just a really, really awesome complement to everything. He's not a guy that's dragging you around. He's not a guy that's going to get plugged into a terrible team and just put the team on his back necessarily. I mean, we saw that. Things started to fall apart. How much did him playing at a high level matter? It didn't. They didn't win a single game aside from the Giants and barely, and then they got blown out by the Giants shortly after. Again, it's not Jalen's fault. He continued to be his guy, but he absolutely needs a good team around him. But still, he is a good football player. 3,800 yards, 23 touchdowns, 15 interceptions is what it is. Obviously, there is a rushing threat here as well. He ran for 602 yards, had 15 additional touchdowns with 9 fumbles. He had a 76 rushing grade along with his 86 overall grade. Go back real quick. I want to see what his passing grade was. His passing grade was an 83.6. He's been relatively consistent throughout his career. The passing has gotten better every single year. His rookie year was a 57, then a 73, then an 81, and then an 84. So continued growth. It does feel like it's starting to level off, but bottom line is he's a good quarterback, and he's a good football player. There's no sense of like maybe this was a fluke or that was a fluke. He's always been very, very consistent in everything that he's done. If we look at him under pressure, he is very good under pressure. His grade is a 73.4, 65 passing grade. That might not sound very good. He also has a 91 rushing grade, so that's the biggest threat when you bring pressure. But really, most guys are quite terrible. To have a 70 overall grade under pressure, that's really impressive. Maybe even more impressive when he's kept clean. When you don't pressure him, he has a 91 PFF grade and 90 passing grade. So if you don't rush him, he has a 90 passing grade. If you do get pressure on him, he has a 91 rushing grade. That's the threat of Jalen Hurts, and that's why every NFL franchise wants to find a guy that has some wheels, because they want this. They want a really good pocket passer that also has the ability to create when things break down with his legs. And I think that's another thing that Jalen Hurts does really well, is to keep those two things compartmentalized. Because some guys I think that are especially very mobile struggle to be able to, again, compartmentalize those two things where you're not running when you should be throwing and you're not standing in the pocket when you should be taking off and everything else. At running back, we've got Saquon Barkley. He obviously wasn't there last year. We've talked quite a bit about Saquon because there's been a lot of bickering back and forth. I've said for a long time I think he's overrated. He of course, he's immensely talented, but I think it has more to do with his name than anything else. People remember what he did in college. People remember the name, and they just think, well, it's because the Giants were bad or something. Like it. The guy never became what he was supposed to be. In 6 years, he's run for 5,200 yards, 4.3 yards per attempt, which is certainly nothing special, 35 touchdowns, and 6 fumbles. His best year as far as his grades were his rookie year, 85 PFF grade, 84 rushing grade, 91 fumble grade. All those three categories were his best. It was also his highest yards per attempt year, where he had 5. It was his highest touchdown year with 11. Tied for his lowest fumble year with 0. And it's just been essentially downhill. Not linear, but it's all been downhill from there. The next year, it was down to a 72 grade. He went from 5 yards per attempt to 4.6. His touchdowns went from 11 to 6. Fumbles went from 0 to 1. His rushing grade went from an 84 to a 76. In 2020, he was injured. 2021, he comes back, plays, a half a year, has less than 600 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 fumbles. Comes back 2022, first time playing a full season since 3 years prior, gets 1,300 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns and a fumble. That's about as good as he's ever had. I mean, statistically, it was really good, largely just because he had more attempts. And then last year, 3.9 yards per attempt with 6 touchdowns, 2 fumbles, and under 1,000 yards. And that's with almost 300 snaps, almost 250 attempts. So that's really not very good. To run the ball 250 times and not get to 1,000 yards is not super fantastic. Because most guys, Aaron Jones certainly would have clear over that. He just didn't bring it. And then if you look at 2023, his grades, he had 3 games where he graded 70 or higher and 0 in the 80s or 90s. Everything else was 60s or 50s. Everything. So, Saquon has taken a beating. He's run the ball quite a bit from college to the pros. He's had a ton of injuries. And, for a running back to be 27 going on 28, when you've had as much wear and tear, both in terms of how many times you've carried the ball and how many injuries you've had, 28 is really getting up there. So I am not as afraid of Saquon Barkley as I think maybe some other people might be. Brings us to receiver. I'm just going to highlight the top 4 guys, I guess. A.J. Brown It's actually kind of interesting to look at. Obviously, a very good receiver. I think he was always underrated in Tennessee. I mentioned when Philadelphia picked him up, it was a fantastic pickup. He's been great with them. He'll end up being there probably for quite a while. But one of the more interesting things to look at is A.J. Brown and then the Eagles fall off. I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, but the guy, his lowest grade was a 72.7 week 1 through the first 9 weeks. That was his lowest grade. He went on a 6-week tirade where he hovered at about 85 points every single week. Then starting in week 11, 50, 60, 70, 60, 70, 60, 70, 40. That's how he ended the season. Now, he did get injured week 18. He had a knee injury, I think it was. As far as I know, though, weeks 9 through 17, he had an injury, I want to say it was like week 2 or 3, but that would have nothing to do with why starting in week 9, or even you could say in week 11, things started to fall off. But either way, I don't really expect this to continue. I don't really have a reason to expect it. I don't know. I mean, he's a good wide receiver. I wasn't able to find anything in terms of what would have caused him to fall off a little bit. But as A.J. Brown goes, so goes the team, I guess. Then you got Devontae Smith. He's a talented guy, not as good as A.J. Brown, maybe not as good as his reputation either, because in 2021, as a rookie, he was really solid, 77 grade. That went up to an 81, and then he actually had his worst year last year. He had a 3-game stretch where he was really solid, weeks 11, 12, and 13, kind of filling in for A.J. Brown, apparently. But then promptly went right back down, 60, 60, 60, 50. Prior to that, it was 70, 70, 50, 70, 40, 50, 60, 60, 70. So, it was he's kind of good, not great, I guess you would say. He's got some serious talent. He was a 10th overall pick for a reason out of Alabama. He's definitely got a lot of speed. He is I think if you were to categorize him, A.J. Brown is a top 10 talent. Devontae Smith is more of a call him a top 32 talent. I think he was ranked like 32nd last year, so even that is somewhat in question. Then you've got their tight end, Dallas Goedert. I think he might be in his final year. Let me look real quick here. He is, so this year is his last year, so next year he'll be a free agent, and he'll be 30 years old next year, so I don't know for sure. We're kind of getting into that thing that I was talking about where looking into the future, it's kind of a question mark. They probably end up paying him. It'll more than likely be on a short-ish term. I mean, it could be up to 3 years, but it'll be like one real year kind of thing if they offer him anything. He's another guy that's probably more talent in name than in actual production. He peaked in 2021. He's been good his entire career, but 2019, 20, and 21 was kind of his sweet spot. He took a step back in 2022 and then a further step back in 2023. There's a trend here of a lot of guys kind of going in that direction. A.J. Brown didn't trend backwards, but toward the end of the season, he fell apart. Devontae Smith had his worst year. You've got Dallas Goedert had his worst year. A lot of that kind of stuff going on. And then finally, they went out and picked up Jahan Dotson. He kind of seemed like he might be a thing as a rookie, but this past year, 2023, 57 PFF grade, 58 receiving grade. He had one game. It was actually against Philadelphia, which is maybe why they got all hot and bothered about it, where he performed well. He had 9 targets, 8 receptions, 108 yards, and a touchdown. Outside of that, I mean, he's mostly hovering in the 50s as far as this PFF grade goes. So they have 2 receivers, not 3. They didn't just, we got Jahan, so everything's fine now. That's not the situation that they're in. They've got 2. So it's a good group. I mean, you look at quarterback, you look at Saquon, you look at A.J. Brown, you look at Devontae Smith. It's not a bad group. I just think it might be slightly overrated. All right, and then looking at their offensive line, probably the biggest stud for them, arguably, is actually their 2018 7th-round pick, Jordan Mailata. Every once in a while, you just get those kind of home run guys, and this seems to be that. If you look at it, he's been a left tackle pretty much since he got there. His grades have been pretty consistent. His rookie year was a little bit lower, down in the 60s, but otherwise it was 80s, 70s, and 80s. This past year, 83 run blocking, 83 pass blocking, relatively consistent. He had a couple bad games mixed in there. He did give up 45 pressures, which is actually very high. Just 3 sacks, 2 hits, but 40 hurries is a ton. I don't know why his grade would be as high as it is, other than I don't know, but he grades out very well, and the run blocking is also quite high, although the grades there are much more sporadic. There's a lot of lower graded games in here with some 280s and a 90 mixed in that kind of prop that up, as opposed to the consistency of the pass blocking. But there's certainly opportunities to generate pressures off of Mailata, but either way, he doesn't give up a lot of sacks, grades out very, very well, and he's a massive human being at 6'8", 365. Kick in to guard, got more of a good, not great, sort of a classic Packers grade thing here. 77 pass blocking, 67 run blocking. Like I said, that's just pretty classic. He's been a left guard there for basically 3 years. So that's more or less what you're going to get from him. Pretty consistent. Think of any other Green Bay Packers interior offensive lineman over the last several years. Then it starts to get a little bit dicey when you look at the rest of the interior. Cam Jurgens was their right guard last year. He had a 55 pass blocking grade, 63 run blocking grade, and he's getting kicked into center. And of course, there's going to be questions about whether or not that's going to make things even worse. Then you got Mekhi Becton. Talk briefly about how cheaply he came. Kind of a shocking thing going from the number 11 selection in 2020. He actually had a decent rookie year, ends up getting hurt in 2021, does not play in 2022, finally comes back in 2023, has a 53 grade, 56 run blocking, 60 pass blocking, and they're basically just done with him. So he gets picked up, and apparently he is going to be a 6'7", 363-pound right guard. So we'll see how that pans out, but he gave up 50 pressures last year, including 12 sacks for the Jets. So this is somewhat disastrous. Then you get one of these rare guys in Lane Johnson, 34 years old, still going strong, not really showing any signs of slowing down. He's had 9,000 snaps at right tackle, 376 at left tackle all with the Philadelphia Eagles since 2013. Last year, 80 pass blocking, basically an 80 run blocking. Pretty consistently solid guy. Really only had one bad day, and that was against Dallas. Steady as they come. I mean, that cliff could come at any time. Maybe this is it, but I mean, he's just one of those guys that just apparently can take care of his body and probably is going to end up playing, beyond his mid-30s, 36, 37. Who knows how long this is going to go. I suppose that's probably going to be largely up to him how long he wants to. It's got to be a lot of work to maintain your body when you get up into your mid-30s to play at the level that he plays at. But we're also kind of getting into, again, some of these issues with the offensive line, with Lane Johnson being up in age. Mekhi Becton is just a 1-year patch job. Cam Jurgens is in his final year. Can't imagine that's a long-term thing. And then a few other guys. So, yeah, offensive line, not really a great long-term project for them. I would say they have 2 players, Jordan Mailata at left tackle and Landon Dickerson as a good, not great guard. And after that, they need 3 replacements on the offensive line. So, all right, why don't we take our final break? We'll come back and take a quick look at their defense, and then we'll plan on getting up out of here. We'll be right back. All right, let's fire this up with the defensive line, I guess we'll say. It'll include the outside linebackers, defensive tackles, and pass rushers. It's largely the same group. They did lose some pieces. They added Bryce Huff from the Jets. We mentioned that. But overall, it's the same group, which isn't great necessarily for the Philadelphia Eagles, although they are some pretty talented guys. The defense sucked. Jalen Carter is probably the most promising of the group. I mean, an absolute freak. He was taken 9th overall, shouldn't have even made it to 9th, out of Georgia. 23 years old, had basically a 90. It was an 89 PFF grade in his first year. Run defense was a 68, tackling 56, but a pass rush was an 86. He had almost 50 pressures on 400 pass rush attempts and 7 sacks. Very inconsistent, though. I doubt that's going to make that big of a difference. He's just going to continue to grow. Maybe the inconsistency is just kind of similar to what we saw with Wyatt and whatnot. There's a lot of highs and lows because you're just an athletic freak. You don't know what to do with it. But just running through his grades real quick to give you an idea, 90, 60, 90, 70, 70, 60, 80, 60, 70, 70, 60, 20, 80, 60, 70, 90. So mostly good, but just very, very up and down. One very randomly terrible game against Dallas, but overall really solid, scary pass rush football player in particular. Then you have Jordan Davis, another Georgia Bulldog. He was a first-round pick in 2022 at 13 overall. He's the big 6'6", 336-pound guy. He's not quite as impressive. He had a 71 grade as a rookie, 70 in year 2, despite being almost 340 pounds, just a 62 run defense grade, 37 tackling grade. He did have a 67 pass rush grade, which isn't terrible, but it was 18 pressures and 4 sacks on 282 attempts, which is terrible. So overall, you got a guy. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Slayton, where it's almost identical to Slayton because it's a decent pass rush grade, but what you really want is the run defense and tackling, and that's kind of terrible. So it is what it is with Jordan Davis. We'll see what happens in year 3, but. He went backwards from 1 to 2, so it's not super promising. And then Milton Williams is the other guy on the defensive line, the third man on that 3-man front. Good, not great player. Last 2 years, he was kind of hovered around a 70, mostly a run defender, no pass rush ability really to speak of. So you got your run defense from Milton, you got your pass rush from Jalen Carter, and Jordan Davis you just hope can be a solid football player. Off the edge, Josh Sweat, he has been with Philadelphia for quite a long time. Did have a good year in 2022, but aside from that, it's been kind of This past year, 68 grade, 53 run defense, 74 pass rush. He had 68 pressures and 564 attempts, 7 sacks. Not a terrible pass rusher, I guess, but even that was pretty spotty. Then you got Brandon Graham, who is 36 years old, another guy that is propping up this team. He's been with Philadelphia since 2010. Still playing at a relatively high level. I mean, it's pretty inconsistent, but still overall. I mean, he dropped, in 2022, he had a 90 overall grade. That dropped to an 80, still pretty good, though. 66 run defense, 78 pass rush. But again, very inconsistent. I mean, 70, 60, 70, 70, and then it went down 60, 50, 40, 60. And then, just kind of, I'm not going to go through all of it, but a little bit more inconsistent. He had 4 sacks. He did have over 10% pressure rate, which is solid, but not a lot of production sack-wise. And I think it's fair to say that maybe he's starting to come down a little bit. Aside from his injured year in 2021, 2023 was his worst year since 2013. So we'll see if that downward trend continues. And then they go out and get Bryce Huff, which is their big acquisition off the edge. He's 26 years old. They signed him to a multi-year deal for a decent chunk of money, and I don't think he's that great of a football player. I think maybe it's somewhat to do with maybe being a little bit more of a scheme fit. He's more of an outside linebacker, at least he's more accustomed to that, played that with the Jets. His first 2 years, he graded out 58 and 60. 2022 was graded really, really high, but he played about a half a season. He got injured, and his tackling and run defense was still terrible. Just had a bunch of pressures. 2023, the pressures were still really incredible. I mean, 67 pressures and 10 sacks on 334 attempts is wild. But a 48 run defense, 74 tackling grade, and very, very inconsistent in terms of his production. In fact, the second half of the season was pretty bad. From weeks 1 through 9, he only had 2 bad games. From weeks 10 through 18, he only had 2-3 good games. So, really high pressure rate, which, you got to be excited about, I guess. And the sack numbers were 10, which is fine. Prior to that, 4, 4, and 2. So he's got 10 sacks for his first 3 years and then 10 this year. It feels fluky and desperate and weird, and I don't fully understand it. Again, similar to the wide receivers, it's not a bad group. Jalen Carter's scary. Jordan Davis is a massive, scary human being. Milton Williams has got some decent run defense ability. And between Sweat, Graham, and Bryce Huff, there's certainly some pressure ability there coming off the edge, and probably consistent because you can rotate the three out pretty evenly. I'm guessing Brandon Graham's going to spend a lot of time on the bench. But, is it the scariest thing you've ever seen? Not necessarily. And again, not that it matters, not that Packer fans necessarily care, especially coming into week one, but I just look at it for the long term, and I'd be a little bit nervous if I was an Eagles fan because it just feels like, we've got an opportunity with a decent quarterback here to do something, and our organization that is praised nonstop about how well they're run, it's a little bit iffy in my opinion. Then we move to linebacker. It appears that they've gone out and gotten just 2 brand new linebackers in Zach Bond and Devin White. Both of them were free agent acquisitions. Zach Bond, former Wisconsin Badger, who played for the Saints for 4 years, kind of reminds me of the Bears going out and getting a guy who had his one good year to kind of impress everybody. He's really been a backup his entire career. He's played 600 snaps in 4 years. So I don't even know if you'd call that 2 full years, maybe 2 years worth. But his first 3 years, he graded out quite terribly. Last year was his first kind of full year. He had a 70 grade, which is fine. It was basically just high 50s, low 60s every single game, with 4 or 5 good games mixed in to kind of average out to a 71 overall. Definitely not a scary guy. Then they went out and got Devin White. And this guy's been consistently like the worst linebacker in football. His grades over 5 years, 50, 40, 30, 40, 40 are his overall grades. His run defense grades, 40, 40, 20, 40, 30. This is for the season. He had a 30 in 2021. This is the year he played the most snaps for Tampa Bay. 36 overall grade, 29 run defense grade. His tackling grades graded in the 70s only once, and it was last year. His coverage grades are appalling. 57.4 was his highest ever. That was his rookie year. And then pass rush is the thing that he seems to excel at. And he's graded out 70 or higher 2 years out of his 5. So they obviously have a plan for him, but he's awful. He's really, really bad. So I'm not, in the video that I had watched about the Eagles guy kind of talking about his team and the matchup and all that, he said this was his biggest fear for the team as linebacker. He knew that they desperately needed to do something. They went out and did something, and he's not necessarily happy with what they went out and did, and I would have to agree with that. You've got a backup outside linebacker playing inside linebacker for you, and then you go and get Devin White, who has played for Tampa Bay for 5 years and has been absolutely god-awful, and that's your linebacking core. So best of luck. And finally, we'll close out with the DBs here. Darius Slay, obviously a pretty well-known commodity. He was here in Detroit for a long time. Kind of revived his career a little bit in Philly. He had, as far as I could tell, in Detroit, he was kind of cooked. His first year in Philly, he really wasn't very good there either. He's been there 3 years since, and his grades have been 81, 73, 68. Now, that's not a great sign. It's certainly trending in the wrong direction, and he was injured quite a bit last year as well. He is 33, going on 34, 33 and a half years old right now. Not the scariest guy in the world. I mean, we've kind of been beaten up on Darius Slay for a while. I remember he was in his heyday in Detroit, 2016, 2017, whatever, when he was at his best. There was a lot of talk about how good he was, and it's like, I don't know, dude. Granted, we had Devontae Adams, but it was like, I'm not super worried about it. And I think that continues now, even though we don't have Devontae Adams. Darius Slay is not, 2016 Darius Slay anymore either. Across from him is, or possibly in the slot? Who's in the slot here? I don't know. Let me check this, how they have it here. In the slot, they actually have Quinion Mitchell's going to play in the slot, and that's interesting enough. We'll see if that holds up. Isaiah Rodgers will be on the other side of him then. Kind of an interesting situation with Isaiah Rodgers. He didn't really play as a 6th-round pick for the Colts in year 1. Year 2, he comes in as a 72 coverage grade, pretty solid. Year 3 goes up to an 81.5 coverage grade, real solid. And then he gets suspended for the gambling stuff. He gets a full year suspension, and the Colts just cut him. Well, the Eagles pick him up. So we haven't seen a ton of Isaiah Rodgers, but it's been about 2 full seasons, and he got significantly better from year 2 to year 3. And I don't know. I mean, seems to be like he might be a decent enough football player. We'll have to see. He's been out of football for a little bit of a while. 5'10", 170. I don't really know outside of that. I mean, it doesn't feel like a great guy that you'd want covering anybody that's the Green Bay Packers. I mean, if he doesn't have speed, the last thing you want is a 5'10", 170 guy trying to cover Christian Watson. That's a disaster waiting to happen. But even the guys like Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks, it just feels, these are guys that like to, muscle their way around a little bit. Being 170, 5'10", that's going to be a rough day at the office. Finally, Quinion Mitchell, obviously we don't know anything about him. Super fast guy, I know that from college, and he blew everybody away at, I think it was a Senior Bowl, when he finally got to match up against guys, not Toledo-level competition. But in this preseason, he played against Baltimore, had a 79 grade in his 24 snaps, 81.3 coverage grade. He did have a pass breakup, 2 targets, 1 reception for 7 yards and a pass breakup. And then week 2 against New England, about a 70 grade, 69 coverage grade. 1 target, 1 reception for 1 yard is all he gave up. So, I mean, it seems promising. Obviously, we have no idea what he's going to be able to do. Their other rookie, who I believe is a backup nickel anyways, is not going to be playing. So we'll see. Quinion Mitchell is an unknown, but I would just remind everybody, I mean, although Isaiah Rodgers and Quinion Mitchell are both new to the situation, this was a massive liability last year, and I just really struggle to think that this is going to massively improve, especially week 1. I mean, if these guys slowly start to get their footing with Fangio and whatnot, yeah, that certainly could happen. Week 1 is going to be a stretch. And then finally, safety, and we've talked about this 1,000 times. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was with the New Orleans Saints. He wasn't very good. His rookie year, he was. And, he was a guy everybody liked out of college, and this is a great formula for somebody being famous forever. He was very well-liked in the draft community and whatnot. I don't remember if I liked him or not. I might have. Who knows? He ends up going in the 4th round and has a great rookie year. 72 grade, 84 run defense grade, 70 coverage grade. Even had 11 pressures on 43 attempts with a 73 pass rush grade. 86.4 passer rating when targeted. What else? He had 6 pass breakups and a pick. Even the next year, he had 11 pass breakups and a pick. But he fell off after that. 60, 60, 60. Then he went to Detroit, had a 72 grade, which is fine, aside from the part where he played 3 games. So you kind of disregard that. I mean, he just is what he is. He's And I think that they went backwards going back to C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Then they got Reed Blankenship. He is going into his 3rd year. He's an undrafted free agent in 2022. The grades look pretty good, but when you look at the week to week, it's pretty rough. He really had 4 good games last year. He had a 73 grade, but he had 4 good games overall. He had a 78 coverage grade based on 3 good games. And you got to understand, how could that be? Because a 60 is just average. So if you have a 60 every single week and then a 90, you're going to jump up because you're not averaging them all out. 60 is sort of your baseline, and then that 90 would pop you up. So he's a 60 pretty much every week. He's got a 40 and some 50s mixed in. But when you add a 78, a 77, and an 89 to a bunch of just straight, basically zeros, that's going to pop you up quite a bit. But that's really what it is. I mean, he 4 games, week 1, 3, 6, and 9. Aside from that, it was 50, 60, 60, 60, 40, 50, 60, 60, 60, 50, 60. That's what he did. So, any given Sunday, obviously everybody has a good day once in a while, and every good player has a bad day once in a while. But overall, the safeties are not very good. The linebackers are not very good. The cornerbacks are a question mark. The defensive line is solid for sure. The offensive line has got some good tackles, but you got to worry about center and right guard. They've got 2 good wide receivers, a solid but not elite, but solid tight end, good enough running back, and a top 10 quarterback. And again, there's still a question of what the heck happened last year. Now, in that place in the playoff game where they got blown out, I think Brown and Hurts were out, but they were in week 18, and they were there week 17 and 16 and 15 and 14 and 13 and 12 and 11 when their team sucked. The 12, I don't remember exactly when. It doesn't matter. So I as of right now, and I will keep digging into this, I'm going to stand on what I said. I'm not guaranteeing anything because, again, if the Eagles and Packers are both full strength, that's a tough game. Call it a coin flip. And if you want to say the Eagles are 2-point, 3-point favorites, fine. That's still a coin flip. But you still have to get over a major hump of, do they still suck? They might. I don't know that they don't. So, anyways, that's just kind of I won't call it a brief run through, but a run through of their team, the changes that they've had, their roster, et cetera, and I guess we'll just continue on with this through the week to make sure that we're as prepared as we can possibly be for the upcoming game. 2 quick notes. Number 1, both teams, as far as I can tell, are perfectly healthy, not including IR. I think all of the injured Eagles players practice. Same for the Packers. They were 53 of 53 again in practice. The other thing is I looked into the altitude thing a little bit. I forget the exact altitude of Sao Paulo, but it's about half the height or the altitude that you'd have in Denver. So if it's 5,000, it's like 2,500 feet in the air or something. And apparently the acclimation process is basically non-existent. For most people, there is no acclimation issues. For some people, there may be some like lightheadedness or dizziness or whatever that can go away in about a day. Now, if you go absolutely really high up, I guess the nausea can go away in a day or two, but the red blood cell count or whatever to help you to breathe can take 1 to 2 weeks. So if this was a really high elevation, it wouldn't actually be fixed in a day or so. But apparently this is not high enough for that to be a massive concern if you're there for a day or two. And for most people, it wouldn't matter anyways. There would be no issues to begin with. So we'll take that off the table as an excuse if things start to go south. So anyways, yeah, we're another day closer. That's all. I mean, we're just biding our time at this point, man. We're talking football, we're doing whatever, but at the end of the day, it's like, come on, just give me the game. Just give me like the Eagles Blankenship, cool, man, frickin' safety. What? Let's play the game. I just need it. But we'll get there, man. We'll get there. We are planning a live stream as well. It should be me and Cullen doing the games this year. We'll see if we can get some special guests or whatever once in a while, here and again. But otherwise, I will just talk to you tomorrow. We'll keep doing this thing until we get there. You guys have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
They say birds, but we clip their wings. They know how so.